Hello, I'm Community Relations Officer Jim Long.
And I'm Officer Angela Haseman. Welcome to Plymouth Police Department show, Along for the Ride. In this month's show, we will be discussing the issue of domestic violence, what it is, how to help victims, and what you can do to help stop this insidious issue.
In addition, we will be reminding you how to keep your home safe from burglary. So join us for the next half hour as we take you along for the ride.
October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Unfortunately, domestic violence continues to be a problem. In Minnesota, many hundreds of women are abused each year, and about 200 women have tragically been killed in the past decade as a result of domestic violence. Today, we have Helen, a legal advocate from Home Free, to talk to us about domestic violence. Thank you, Helen, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you start out by telling us what domestic violence is?
Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior by one person in a relationship to assert or maintain a degree of power and control over the other person. It can include physical violence, sexual, emotional violence, psychological violence, as well as threats. In the criminal context, domestic assault is any act committed with the intent to cause physical harm or to cause fear of immediate bodily injury to a family or household member.
Why does domestic violence occur? Why is it so prevalent?
Well, domestic violence occurs because of one person trying to assert power and control. A lot of times we do see it co-occurring with substance use such as drugs or alcohol, but it's really important to keep in mind that those substances don't cause the abuse. They just may lower someone's ability to use good judgment or reduce their inhibitions, but it's actually the desire to be in a position of control over someone else that is the cause.
It's primarily male-female, but it can be any relationship. So can you talk a little bit about who commits domestic violence?
Absolutely. Domestic violence can be committed by anyone against a family or household member. It occurs in relationships between people of all ages, cultures, socioeconomic backgrounds. It occurs at the same rates in same-sex couples as it does in couples of opposite genders. It can also include violence between parent and child, siblings, and younger people in teen dating relationships.
A lot of people who haven't experienced domestic violence look at somebody that might be in an abusive relationship and go, why don't they just leave? Can you talk a little bit about why victims stay in a relationship?
Victims have many reasons for staying in relationships, but one of the main reasons people stay is for their safety. The danger increases exponentially at that moment that someone tries to leave a relationship. They are at an increased risk of violence. So it may just not be the right time for them to make that step of leaving. Another reason may be financial. If a victim of domestic violence is financially dependent upon the person who is abusing them, it may not be something they see as feasible that they could leave the relationship and continue to support themselves, especially if there's young children they're worried about taking care of. Some other reasons might be religious. If someone is a believer of a religion that, for example, looks down upon divorce, they might be worried being shamed essentially if they leave the relationship. And a lot of times for people, it's just emotional connection. They continue to feel love towards the person who's abusing them, and they believe the promises that the behavior will stop, though unfortunately it often doesn't.
And which kind of gets us to a cycle of domestic abuse. There's usually a cycle. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We do see a lot of times abusers continuing to abuse, whether it be the same victim or new victims again and again.
If somebody watching this show suspects that a friend or family member may be in an abusive relationship, what should they do, or what signs should they look for?
If you suspect someone may be in an abusive relationship, it's okay to say to them, I'm concerned about you, I'm worried, these are the reasons why. They might say, there's nothing wrong, or I don't want to talk about it, but that's okay. At least you've planted that seed that you're someone they can come talk to if they change their mind. If someone does approach you and let you know that they're in an abusive relationship and wants to talk about it, it's important to listen to that person, to believe them, and to never ask them anything like, what did you do to bring upon the violence on yourself? Because it's never the victim's fault. It doesn't matter, what someone says, what they do. It's never okay for someone to put their hands on someone else.
How do people recognize that maybe they are in that abusive relationship?
Yeah, there are a lot of red flags as far as abusive relationships are concerned, and some are much easier to spot than others. So of course, physical abuse is maybe the easiest red flag to see.
Right.
There's verbal abuse such as name calling, threats, maybe nonverbal threats such as damaging property or using violence against family pets. Some of the most subtle red flags, though, might be behaviors like extreme jealousy, checking in on your partner repeatedly, constantly asking, who are you with, when will you be home, where are you going,
Right.
reading text messages.
If someone realizes that maybe they're seeing these red flags and that they realize, hey, I may be in an abusive relationship, how do they get help? Where do they turn besides maybe asking a friend or family member, but then where do they go?
If someone's thinking of leaving an abusive relationship, I think probably it would be a great idea to get in touch with an advocate, because an advocate can help you identify a safety plan. They can help you apply for an order for protection if you need it, apply for housing or emergency financial assistance. No two safety plans are ever going to look alike, because to be effective, they need to be tailored to the needs of the person who will be using them.
Right.
Well, a safety plan might include things like making sure you have copies of important documents like your birth certificate, social security cards, immigration papers. But it might also include having a bag packed with a change of clothes, cash, cell phone, diapers and formula if you've got children, making sure the car has a full tank of gas. And like I said earlier, many people aren't ready to leave abusive relationships yet, and those people can still do safety plans with advocates. They're just going to look a little different. They might be things like making sure you know where the dead zones are for your cell phone in the house if you need to call 911, making sure you know how to get out if you do, and if you need to leave in a hurry, and things like that.
And if somebody contacts an advocate home free, for example, is that confidential or private?
It's absolutely 100% confidential and private. When we're working with people, we always make sure we ask right off the bat too if we need to call back, if it's safe to leave a message at the number. When we call, it does show up as a blocked number, so we know how to make that communication safe for the victim.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about the services that Home Free specifically provides? And
We have a support group in Plymouth on Thursday nights, and we also do community outreach and education to make sure the community can stay educated about issues related to domestic violence. In our community program, we do criminal and civil advocacy. So in the civil advocacy context, that would be helping people file for orders for protection, harassment restraining orders, and criminally, it's making sure that victims in criminal cases understand the criminal court process, can give their input to prosecutors about what they'd like to see happen with the case, and have the ability to make victim impact statements if they'd like to. And we also do help people apply for the Safe at Home program.
okay. Can you talk a little bit about the Safe at Home program?
Safe at Home program is an address confidentiality program that the Secretary of State's office runs. And essentially, applicants apply for a P.O. box, which they can then use as their physical address on documents such as their driver's license, utility bills, so that that physical address remains confidential. And this is especially good for people who have left abusive relationships and don't want their abuser to know where they are presently residing.
And I want to go back just a little bit about the shelter itself. And somebody that needs to maybe makes the decision that I need to leave now, is it difficult for her to get into a shelter, or are there other accommodations such as hotels or other places to stay?
It can sometimes be difficult depending on the volume of women who are in the shelter at any one time. And if the shelter is full, at least our shelter, there is a program called Day One, which helps women who are looking for shelter and men to connect with shelters throughout the state, but it is a service that helps people identify what the closest shelter is that can accept them.
And then how long can you stay at a particular shelter?
That varies widely. At our shelter, it's a couple months. I think some are more short-term.
And so now moving on to the law enforcement side. In the past, we didn't do a lot with domestic violence, but over the past decade, we've really gotten a lot more aggressive in, arresting abusers and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about how are domestic violence cases reported to you? How do you work with victims, and then how do you kind of see them go through the system?
Whenever there's a domestic abuse incident reported to the police, we do get notified whether there's been an arrest or not. And in either case, we're going to contact the party who the police have identified as the victim in that situation based upon the investigation they did at the scene, and make sure that the victim is connected with resources, that he or she is safe, and knows how to get in touch with us if they don't have any safety concerns at the moment, but may in the future. If there are charges that are being pressed against the abuser in that situation, we'll also make sure the victim understands the way the criminal court process works and our role in it. As a criminal advocate, my role is really to make sure the prosecutor has victim input about what the victim would like to see happen in the criminal case. So that means if a victim wants to see the charges moving forward, we let the prosecutor know. We let them know if the victim would like to testify. In some cases, we do see that the victims don't want to see cases go forward. And while we do let the prosecutors know that, once the charges have been filed, it's really in the hands of the city and the judge. And we don't see cases get dismissed outright very often at all.
Can you kind of talk a little bit about domestic violence? There's a difference between maybe somebody that a slap and somebody that actually maybe breaks a leg, or there's different levels, a misdemeanor versus a felony, and somebody this is their first time they've been charged versus someone that's a repeated abuser and that's been charged several times. Can you talk a little bit about that?
In Minnesota, domestic assault can be charged as a misdemeanor, a gross misdemeanor, or a felony. In Minnesota, domestic abuse is also what's called an enhanceable crime, which means that the more domestic convictions you get, the more serious future charges will be. So while someone's first incident may be a misdemeanor, the second in 10 years could be a gross misdemeanor, and the third could be a felony. Now, the difference between those is really the level of punishment that the defendant could receive if they're convicted.
Okay.
So for a misdemeanor, someone could face up to a $1,000 fine and 90 days in jail. A gross misdemeanor, they could face up to a $3,000 fine and 365 days in jail. And a felony, they could go to prison for more than a year. Some cases, such as strangulation, for example, your very first one could be a felony right off the bat. So although they do get more serious the more you get, some you're going to go right to felony level.
Right. I know the court process sometimes moves a little bit slower, but how long does a typical case usually take from the day the assault occurs to the actual trial?
Well, actually, most cases we see don't go all the way to trial, but the vast majority get settled before it gets to that point by a plea agreement. And how long that process takes really varies depending on the facts of the case. I've seen some cases where the defendant will plead guilty their first or second time before the judge because they don't have a case, they don't have a defense, there are witnesses, and they just want to admit that they did it. Other cases I've seen drag out a year or more, which is a really long time, but I don't see that too often. On average, what I see is cases going before the judge 3 to 4 times and maybe lasting 3 to 4 months between the initial incident and when it gets resolved.
But again, that doesn't necessarily mean the victim is without protection, because right away they can file for order for protections and things like that, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of cases, the courts will put in place what's called a domestic abuse no contact order, or a DANCO. And that's similar to an order for protection, but instead of being in family court, it's in the criminal court, and it's tied directly to the criminal case. If a victim doesn't want that put in place, typically he or she's going to need to come to court and make the request for contact through an advocate, so they don't need to speak to the judge directly, but they do need to come to court, and so that the court knows that they've talked to an advocate and worked through a safety plan.
And I think that that's a great point that you bring up, is that no contact order, because abuser is prohibited by the court unless there's those arrangements to not come back. So there's been some new laws recently regarding domestic violence victims, and that domestic violence victims, for example, they can get out of a lease. Can you touch on a little bit of those programs that are really helping?
If someone has an order for protection, they can give a copy of that to their landlord to show that there's domestic abuse happening and that they need to break the lease to move away from their abuser, and they won't be penalized. They do need to pay, I believe it's 1 month rent when they leave, but there's no other penalties as far as breaking the lease goes in that case.
Home Free can help victims kind of navigate too.
Yeah, we do help people look for housing and find out how to apply for things like emergency assistance, which in some cases can pay for your deposit and your first month's rent and things like that. So there are a lot of options available that we can help direct people towards.
Before we conclude, I just want to touch on, there's been a couple of high-profile cases of homicides directly resulted from domestic violence. And I guess that's what concerns a lot of victims, is they're afraid. And how does somebody maybe determine the lethality or the probability that an abuser may result in homicide?
Some behaviors are more indicative of lethality than others. So for example, where an abuser is using strangulation against their victim, that's extremely serious, and that's why strangulation is charged as a felony right off the bat, because it is a fairly good indicator of someone who could ultimately kill someone else, essentially. Threats to kill a person is also something that should be taken very seriously. And I think most importantly is just, trusting your gut. If something feels really wrong and scary, then don't doubt yourself.
Now, I know that Home Free does a lot of good, but you also need some help from the public because obviously you provide a lot of great services. So what are people, if they're watching today, how can they maybe get involved and help Home Free in its mission?
So we do accept both monetary and in-kind donations. I know the shelter keeps an updated list of things they need at the moment on their website, which is www.missionsinc.org. And so that would be anything from personal items to sheets and diapers. We also have a number of volunteer opportunities too for people who would prefer to donate their time, and these are everything from one-time activities like landscaping or redecorating, which might be good for groups, to more ongoing individual positions as a volunteer advocate. We also have some positions in our immigrant and refugee program and children's programs too.
And I know it's hard to sum up, but if there's one important thing that you really want people to understand about the whole issue of domestic violence, what would that be?
That would be that domestic violence can happen to anyone, and it is never ever the victim's fault, ever. That, along with if something doesn't feel right in your relationship and it's scary, you should trust your gut and really honor yourself that way.
Great advice. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
It was very, very interesting and a lot of great information. Again, if you are the victim of domestic abuse, or if you know someone who is a victim of domestic abuse, please seek help.
Both Angie and I have worked through the years talking to residents about important steps to take in preventing a burglary. After taking reports of burglaries, reading over crime statistics to see how burglars have gained entry into homes, and talking to victims, we came up with the following list.
One thing I'm sure everyone would agree on, and that's our number one tip: lock up. About 60% of burglaries are unforced, which means the burglar just walked in through an unlocked door, open overhead garage door, or climbed in an open window. Many reformed burglars say that household burglary is an easy task and poses no challenge because people simply don't lock their doors and windows.
Here's our tip number 2. Start or be an active member of a neighborhood or apartment watch group. People who live on blocks where they know one another, look out for one another, and call 911 for suspicious behavior have less crime. Would you like to start a neighborhood watch group or revitalize a current watch group? Give Sarah Quino with the Plymouth Police Department a call at 763-509-5198, and she'll help you get started.
And burglars don't want to be seen, so they usually choose homes where neighbors don't seem to watch out for each other. In addition, they will usually choose a target where they feel is no one at home. So our number 3 tip is make your home look occupied. Utilize lighting, radio, or even a television to give the impression that you are home. Timers are a great idea for these electronics. In addition, if you are gone for an extended period of time, make sure that items aren't being left at your door. Have a trusted neighbor or friend check on your home, mow your yard, shovel your walk, or park in your driveway.
Good ideas. And here's tip number 4. Use a good quality deadbolt lock. Make sure to look for locks with a 1-inch throw. If the throw is 1 inch or longer, it will provide better security than a throw that is less than 1 inch. In addition, make sure the deadbolt throw is anchored by a heavy-duty strike plate with 3-inch screws. This same type of lock should be used on garage service doors. After all, just think of all the valuables in a typical garage.
Speaking of garages, last year we saw an increase in garage burglaries where items were stolen from unlocked cars parked in the garage. So here's tip number 5. Remove all valuables from your car, even when you park in your own garage. Take time to clear valuables out of your car and keep your locked car in your locked garage.
Here's tip number 6. Consider an alarm system. Audible alarms are important because they can detect a break-in and draw attention to the situation, allowing police to quickly respond. However, alarms should always be used in addition to locks, not instead of locks. Be sure to know how to use your alarm system. Residents are fined if there's a problem with false alarms.
Tip number 7 is something I think people forget about. Utilize outdoor lighting at night. Pretend you're a burglar. Say you have the choice between 2 homes. House number 1 has a brightly illuminated entrance. House number 2 is completely dark. At which door would you spend time trying to gain entry? The dark one, of course. It is estimated that a 100-watt incandescent light bulb costs only 6 cents if it is left on for 10 hours. Compact fluorescent lights and LEDs are even cheaper.
Tip number 8. Utilize locking devices on your windows and secure sliding doors. Sliding doors are vulnerable because they can be easily forced open. To prevent a sliding glass door from being lifted out of its track, install 3 1 1/4 inch large sheet metal screws in the upper track of the movable door. Make sure they protrude far enough so the sliding frame just clears. You can also place a length of wood in the lower track, secured snugly so the door can't be slid open.
Tip number 9. Take a look at your landscaping. Do you have overgrown hedges or trees that can help conceal a burglar? Unobstructed doors and windows are deterrent because the burglar is forced to work where they can be seen. Also, do you have a side or backyard that is enclosed by fencing that prevents watchful neighbors from seeing a break-in take place? Make sure items aren't left out in your yard, such as tools or ladders that burglars could use to help them make entrance.
And our last tip, number 10. Have a premise security survey done at your home. If you are interested in this service, call Angie at 763-509-5147.
I'll look to see what you have for locks on your doors and windows, answer any specific questions you may have, and give you a checklist of things to consider to help improve your home security. This is a free service.
So that's our list. A lot of common sense stuff, I know, but maybe you thought of something you should do or do differently. Stay safe. Let's take a look at some crimes that have been recently reported in the city of Plymouth. Plymouth Police took reports from 4 separate residences along the 3200 and 3300 blocks of Pilgrim Lane for damages to mailboxes that occurred during a recent evening. According to the officer who took the reports, it appeared that someone had hit the mailboxes with a bat or a similar object, destroying them. A reminder to keep an eye out for individuals out past curfew. Call 911 for suspicious behavior, and if you hear unusual sounds such as a loud crash, check it out by looking out the window, and please call the police. And finally, we hope that this case will serve as a reminder. Never leave your car keys in your car. A victim of a car theft reports that he usually leaves his car keys in his car in his garage at night. Well, a car thief found them and the car was stolen. That practice of leaving car keys in the car, plain and simple, is just not a good idea. From all of us at Along for the Ride, practice good security habits and stay safe.
Hello, I'm Officer Dave Groth with the Plymouth Police Department Traffic Unit. The days are getting shorter and winter is just around the corner, so today I want to remind everyone about the correct way to use vehicle lights. You already know that vehicle headlights need to be turned on from sunset to sunrise, but did you know that drivers must turn their headlights on when it's raining, snowing, sleeting, hailing, or any other time when visibility is impaired by weather, smoke, fog, or other conditions? Taillights must also be on in these conditions. You cannot use parking lights instead of headlights when driving. Many times, headlights may not be needed for visibility, but headlights are important because they help other drivers and pedestrians see your car. So I want to remind everyone that all vehicles must have a working license plate light, and colored lights are prohibited on non-emergency vehicles. So next time you are driving in rain, snow, fog, or other inclement conditions, remember to turn on your headlights. Drive safely.
In each episode of Along for the Ride, we highlight outstanding work done by members of the Plymouth Police Department. While the men and women of the Plymouth Police Department continue to provide outstanding service, my first highlight couldn't have been achieved without the commitment that Plymouth residents have for the safety of their own community. This was on display this past August with a fantastic Night to Unite. The day started off with a kickoff event held at the Plymouth Creek Center from 2:30 to 5 p.m., and it is estimated that more than 1,200 residents took part in the event. The Plymouth Police and Fire Departments, North Memorial Air Care, several departments, and many local businesses provided information, demonstrations, food, and free gifts to the attendees. Plymouth residents from more than 140 neighborhoods gathered for block party events, most of which got a visit from the Plymouth Police or Fire Departments. And it's not too early to put Night to Unite 2014 on your calendar. Night to Unite will be held on Tuesday, August 5th, 2014. During the summer, Mother Nature hit Plymouth hard with several severe storms. We wanted to recognize our police reserve officers and our community emergency response team. Plymouth Reserves and the community emergency response members were called out to assist with issues arising after the storms, allowing officers to respond to hundreds of other emergency calls. Thanks to the efforts and assistance of the Plymouth Police Reserves and the Plymouth Community Emergency Response Team, the City of Plymouth recovered quickly after the storms. Finally, we want to mention those who literally went the distance to help Special Olympics. Earlier this summer, on June 20th, the Plymouth Police Department participated in the law enforcement torch run that benefits and publicizes the activities of the Special Olympics Games. Mayor Kelly Slavic, Plymouth Police Chief Mike Goldstein, and other Plymouth police officers carried the Special Olympics torch through the city of Plymouth along a 6-mile stretch of Northwest Boulevard. Plymouth received the torch from the Maple Grove Police Department and passed it off to the Minnetonka Police Department. From there, the torch made its way through the metro area, arriving the next day at the University of Minnesota, the site of the Summer Special Olympics Games. The Plymouth Police Department has participated in the torch run for more than a decade, and we are proud to support the Special Olympic Games. Thank you for watching Along for the Ride. We hope you found the show informative. If you have a question or a topic suggestion, please contact us at 763-509-5139.
And don't forget to join us next time as the ride continues.